Rob Richie is president and CEO of Fairvote.org. Fairvote.org is a nonprofit advocating a number of election reforms and interventions, ranked choice voting being among them. Rob has directed Fairvote since its founding in 1992, and I think it's fair to say he has been the biggest proponent of ranked choice voting during that time. Rob, welcome.
Thank you, Joel. I'm really thrilled that this debate is happening all over the country. So look forward to getting into our discussion today.
Yeah, me too. So this is a little bit of an unfair question to get started, just because it's absurd in its breadth. But Fairvote has been around for 30 years.
Yes.
Congrats on the anniversary, by the way. This just happened last year, I guess, right?
Yep.
So give me a brief overview of the organization which you founded, yes, and what's transpired in the last 30 years. I know it's a huge question, but give me the highlights, I suppose.
Yeah. The high level is there was a number of us who came together. This is the early 90s. One of the most famous people at the time was a guy named John Anderson, who had run for president as an independent candidate in 1980, and it actually he polled at one point like 25% nationally, and really generated a conversation about how our politics can handle having a third person. That year also, 92, was when Ross Perot was running for president as an independent, and he ended up getting almost 20% of the vote. And that also triggered a conversation about how do we handle having more than two choices in our politics. And a number of us felt, well, we should have more than two choices in our politics, or at least not have a system that breaks down if we try to have more than two candidates running. And through that, really thought about, I guess, what would be, say, structural solutions to problems, right? So a lot of the ways that people think about political problems is to make it about people and personalities. And we really wanted to sort of look at the underlying structures and say, well, are there ways that we can change the structures that make it not really the problem with the people, but actually have structures that we, the people, under the Constitution, are supposed to have conversations about and change. And the United States is a really interesting example where you can do a lot locally in states, and then finally up nationally. There's this whole tradition of laboratories of democracy. And so Fairvote has really leaned into that idea where we have some big ideas that we think are good ones for national conversation, and look for ways that we can create pilots, create conversations, and get some meaningful change going on. And it's been exciting. It's not been a linear path toward progress, but certainly on ranked choice voting, it has just moved from being a rather exotic international idea to something that's used presidential elections in 2 states and more than 60 cities, and just a whole different kind of conversation going on.
Yeah. So would you say, maybe it would be fair to say that Maine and Alaska both implementing it for national elections? We're talking for the public forum, the national topic about rolling it out nationwide, but it's been in place in 2 states now for a few years at least now. Would it be fair to say that that's been the highlight of your career with Fairvote as far as ranked choice voting goes?
Well, it's interesting. I have written every single one of our year-end fundraising letters, and so I've told this story with real authentic feeling. Like every year, there's felt like something pretty important to tell, and it's not always been as impactful as like, oh, we can use this for presidential, congressional elections statewide. But ranked choice voting has had a lot of progress. We've also worked on other reforms involving electoral college and voter registration and redistricting, and what has maybe changed over 30 years is the conversation that we thought was really important in the early 90s is one that I think a whole lot more people think is important right now, like the health of our democracy and the ways we can help voters feel confident in elections, in their elected officials, that Congress can function. And so we have just a lot more people joining us. So I think that when I think of tangible wins, certainly ranked choice voting in Maine and Alaska is huge. Presidential primaries, it was used in a number of party-run presidential primaries in 2020, but New York City using it for their big mayoral races. There's been a lot of points of excitement, and it does feel on the cusp to doing something more. And we'll have to see if that's possible. But it is in a place where I can now say, in this decade, we actually could achieve the objectives of this resolution. Like we could make this the national norm. And I certainly might have felt optimistically we might be able to do that 10 years ago, but I didn't feel as as tangibly close as I think it is, and being able to see it in action in states like Alaska and Maine really helps.
Yeah, there's certainly some real momentum. So on that topic of momentum, it's like when you introduce the idea of ranked choice voting to someone, it seems like just about everyone says like, "Hey, that's a great idea," and it's probably the case that the vast majority of Americans have either not heard of ranked choice voting or haven't thought about it in much depth. So it is a rather simple intervention, right? You're not changing infrastructure, right? It's not like building a high-speed rail system or something, right? Except maybe, ballots, some minor training, for operators
Yeah.
and voters. So, it's a fairly small change in terms of infrastructure, but then the benefits are wild. Like you get greater representation, less power concentration, and as you say, this leads into just essentially a much stronger democracy. America is at the point where um, there's plenty of analysts would fail to call America a democracy. Certainly not in any pure sense, but ranked choice voting could move the needle on that. So why has ranked choice voting not been implemented already? It seems like there's a number of things that pop out as interesting reasons, like just momentum, institutional momentum. It's hard to change something once you got a groove going. But also party control. I think that the like corruption in the system, it seems to me like that might be a big reason, but I don't really know. Maybe it seems interesting. What would be your take on what's stopping RCV from moving forward?
Yeah, it isn't moving as quickly as I wish it could. Each of the factors you just laid out are part of the story. Let's deal with like the mechanics. So way back in the 90s, we sort of realized that the technical barriers to using ranked choice voting were relatively minimal. Like we use computers, we actually are much better computers now than we did in the 1990s, but we already could see a path forward, and you could already see some places going to ranked choice voting as early as the 90s on voting equipment, and they could have good ballot designs and they could implement it relatively cheaply. But we really have an inefficient election administration regime that makes it challenging to translate the potential to do something to actually make it straightforwardly done. So we only have a handful of voting equipment vendors in the space. Only one of them really makes money. They're very regulated because, of course, voting is super, we want to make sure they get it right, but we actually turn the keys over to private vendors to provide the solution. We have 50 states. We've got a lot of different counties. There's inconsistent kind of regulation and criteria for how to certify voting equipment. And so changes end up getting big price tags, not always being done as well as they should. And it's that latter part that leads into the second thing, which is that I think ranked choice voting is, on a certain level, just common sense. And I'll give you, by the way, I'll pause for a second. It's just on the common sense point. Like, kind of imagine if you had to go in to an ice cream store and you wanted to get an ice cream cone, and they had chocolate, vanilla, and strawberry, and they don't have one, but you don't know which one they don't have. But they probably just don't have one. And you say, okay, I think I want chocolate. It's like, oh, that's the one we don't have today. Sorry, and you have to leave. Or you can have a second choice. You could have a backup choice. Say, well, oh, sorry, you don't have chocolate. Can I have the vanilla or something, right? And that's essentially all ranked choice voting is functionally doing, saying like, rather than sort of guess to make sure your ballot's going to count as effectively as possible, is that you're having an alternative to your first choice if that first choice happens to be the weakest candidate in the field and is essentially dropped from the race. So it's essentially just an insurance policy for your vote. And we all deeply care about the right to vote, or I hope we do. And this is just a way to provide insurance that vote's going to count. And it has a lot of repercussions. Like but that's on the most simple level. Like, yeah, that's a good idea. And but you have a lot of political actors. You have a lot of political players who get invested in a certain way of doing things, are successful in that way of doing things, often dominate a certain level of government with one perspective. And they're like, oh, I think it's okay. I don't know if I really need to change this. We get incumbency reelection rates, well into the 95th, 96, 97 percentile. You have a lot of state legislatures where one party has just run the show for decades, and you have a lot of hesitancy about changing things if there's any uncertainty. So that's where, if you get an implementation of ranked choice voting and it's not as smooth as you want it to be, and they just look at that and they say, maybe it has some downsides. Well, we don't really need to do this. Anyway, it's a good idea, but it's not absolutely necessary. And then you have some people who tend to just be oppositional for one reason or another, and they can sort of play up fear, and the fear of the possibility that it won't work out as much as you will. And so essentially you're often competing against a set of phantoms, or you're like against of possibilities and what ifs. And often you're competing not against just, is it better than the status quo, but is it perfect? And you're saying, is ranked choice voting perfect? I have just found a way that it's not perfect. Aha, I gotcha. It's like, well, that's never really was my argument. I'd say it's just better than what we have, and it's a good step forward. Let's do it. And so it's a trick of like framing it that way, working on those implementation details so they can be as smooth as possible. That took a while. We're still getting there, but we're getting so close. And then just getting enough wins that the reassurance that it's okay can get to that point where it moves from the outlier to the norm. And we're in that process right now. We're sort of betwixt and between. It's no longer just way off as a concept. It is now in place in some really big elections. The biggest city in 7 states, like that's a big deal. But it's still relatively new to a lot of people, relatively new to most voters. Even in the places that use it, they only use it for one office often, or like some city, and then they don't use it for anything else. So while we're in that transition, we just have a lot of work to do to kind of create reassurance. But that's the path that I think we're on right now.
I guess the part of my brain that says it's due to corruption, I mean, it's kind of this like evil Disney version in my head, right? So, I mean, you've obviously been an activist in Washington for decades on voting specifically. So you've met a lot of people that probably are for and against ranked choice voting and other voting policy changes. But in my mind, it's like 80% of all Congress people, they know that if ranked choice voting came along, like they wouldn't have a chance. And so they, hire a bunch of PhDs for think tanks to write, slam pieces on ranked choice voting because they know for a fact it would be a better system. And that's why they don't like it. Is this not you seem to be have like a much more generous view of like it's just kind of hard to change things, and people might
well, the phrase, the devil you know is better than the devil you don't. I think a lot of it is much more, it ain't broke, don't fix it, a solution in search of problem. Because from their perspective, they have to have the buy-in that there's a problem. So let's take the issue of just accommodating third parties and independents in general elections, right? So every time that any significant third party or independent candidate emerges in the presidential election, suddenly like the sky is falling for someone, oh, this is going to hurt my side or something. And it's like lots of hysteria, and then they sort of hope it goes away. They could shame them out of getting many votes or even running. And then it's like, okay, well, now we don't have to worry about it, and so it's like, let's wait until the next disaster and then freak out, but not do anything in the interim, because it's kind of a theoretical thing. But then if it happens, if we get, like a third party or independent candidate have a real impact, it is amazing how lightning quick the players will come to the table and say, my gosh, the problem actually did happen. What can we do, right? And that lightning quickness, though, can actually count against you, because ranked choice voting gets used. And here's the shocking thing that happens in a ranked choice voting election: is somebody wins and the others lose. And then immediately there's like I guess the person who won is the person who will always do better with ranked choice voting, and the people who lost are the ones who should fear it. And I'm on the side that lost, so I'm scared, or whatever. Like it's like very, in fact, surprisingly, short-term thinking. I mean, it's really amazing. So it's that kind of combination of like, is it really a problem? Is it a problem that affects me? So you, from the advocacy side, you need to connect it to problems that make sense to policymakers. It's very hard to persuade elected officials to do something they don't believe is worth doing. You can do it. You can organize, and Frederick Douglass, power concedes nothing without a demand, and like create these like a real urgency of change. And for the biggest uses of it, we will need something analogous to that. But a lot of the opportunities are just like runoff elections, like having a runoff election in December after a November first round election. It's like really expensive, and the voters don't turn out, and it's like holiday season, and yeah, what if we could just get that done in November? Interesting. Tell me more, right?
Hmm.
And there are these kinds of examples where it makes sense, and as long as there's not, um, over excessive caution. I will say that a new development for us has been the sort of the camel's nose under the tent kind of theory, which is that okay, ranked choice voting makes sense for that, but you really want to get it for everything, don't you? And I'm not sure I want it for everything.
Hmm.
And so even the places where they can agree it makes sense, they're starting to debate it for everything. And so that's one where you have to come in all the better armed to at least justify that being a potential outcome, even while you say, look, all we're trying to do is like bring it to vacancy election. Like for instance, Hawaii used ranked choice voting just for congressional vacancy elections. It's a really sensible use of it because it's a small state. When they have a vacancy for Congress, um, they don't have anyone representing half the state until they fill that seat. If they can fill the seat faster using ranked choice voting and get a more representative outcome, they can just make sure that their state is getting good representation in Congress. But it took several years to pass that because a lot of the discussion was, well, if we use it for that, the voters might like it and they might want to use it for everything else. I'm not sure we want to do it for everything else because the party I'm part of basically completely dominates the legislature. And, so you had to have that broader conversation too. And that's kind of the way that things that might seem eminently rational don't happen. And it's not necessarily corruption on the other side. It's just caution
Hmm.
and, and, uh, unintended consequences concerns.
Right, right. That makes sense. So it's not that everyone's evil Disney characters, but everyone's following their motivations, and there's a lot of motivations, and it's a big country, so there's a lot of factors at play.
Yes. Yes. And I'm sure there's some real corrupt people out there,
Also that, also that.
but it's not as many as we might fear. In some ways, that's what makes me hopeful that we can bring change. Because if we were really up against, a set of people who were just going to fight you tooth and nail with any tool they had, they've got a lot of power.
Yep.
So we will need to find allies from within Congress, from within governors and legislators, and we are. That's the promising part of this.
Hmm. So, Fairvote advocates for a number of voting rights changes, and it seems that ranked choice voting might not be enough by itself to solve representation and democracy problems. There are issues like gerrymandering and voting access. You've mentioned electoral college, some other things. Because this topic focuses only on ranked choice voting, could ranked choice voting alone make an impact, or is it difficult to divorce ranked choice voting from other policies in terms of what needs to be changed in voting policy?
Well, this sort of relates a little bit to my answer about like not comparing ranked choice voting to the perfect. It's what's better. And I think it's important to do things that are better. And I think ranked choice voting is clearly better. It's better in some really important ways. And I don't want to overstate that, but we can just pick, maybe I'll pick three examples. So I think the younger people are as voters, the more ready they are for ranked choice voting. I think the more ready they are for ranked choice voting, polls show it, votes when they have a chance to vote on ballot measures. College campuses, we're up to like, I don't know, almost 100 colleges and universities where students on their own have adopted it for student government elections. And it's really a manifestation of like, yeah, when you have more than two choices, rank them. There's a certain intuitive feel to it, and it's exciting to see. Um, and behind that, I think, is a hunger for having more than two choices, or at least the option. So some people are looking forward to the potential of another Joe Biden, Donald Trump, head to head for president. There's others who aren't, right? And it's like, wouldn't it be nice just to have another alternative, right? And then immediately, anyone who proposes that is like, how can you be talking about that? Like, our system will break down, and it'll help elect the person who's the worst, and like this sort of fear. And at some point, that just has to stop. And the way it stops is with ranked choice voting, right? As soon as you have ranked choice voting, you take the pressure valve so much off of that. Like, okay, there is a third candidate. Okay, that's all right. In Australia, where they've had ranked choice voting for more than a century, they have an average of 7 people run in their partisan elections for the House of Representatives. They don't have a president, but they have like a Congress kind of body, a parliament, and it's okay. People run, and no one freaks out. It's just there's additional options, and that's okay. And I think actually that would be really important. That would be very valuable, and I think it would not only give voters an alternative choice, someone to be able to run with a different perspectives. Like I think that we have enough problems facing our country that trying to believe that they can be squeezed into two perspectives that actually then take a lot of issues off the table and neither of them end up talking about. It would be nice to have a wider range. Now, so that's one general election use of it. Then you think of primaries, where we actually do have more people run more and more when one party knows it has a really good chance to win. And because of the overlay of partisan polarization these days, where most of the country essentially is very set for one party or the other. So most statewide races for U.S. Senate, certainly about 90% of U.S. House races, whoever wins the majority party's nomination in that area is very likely to win. So there's an open seat, and 10 people will run or whatever it is. And then you get a lot of choices, but you also get someone who might just be trying to get 20% of the vote or 25% of the vote. And you also get people who aren't very representative, and you just get people not speaking to kind of the trying to be as representative as possible. And that's the nice part about ranked choice voting when you actually have it in place, is that very simple act of giving the power of the voter to say, oh, I not only have a first choice, I'm not limited to that though. Here's my second and third choice. And the candidates know that. They just suddenly have a reason to talk and engage with more people. And you just see it play out. And it's not perfect, and not everyone does it, but you see more of it. You see a lot more of it. And you see candidates who will, like down at the local level. In my hometown here of Tacoma Park, Maryland, we've had it now for several years. And it's just fun. It just means that people walk up to your door, pass the yard sign for someone else, and say they want to talk with you, and say, hey, I see you like someone else as your first choice, but I'd just like to make a case for myself as well. And that's an important conversation, and you can sort of translate that kind of up the chain. So if you think about going back to those primary elections with 7, 10, 15 people, whether it's president, governor, or other office, it just means that you're having healthier conversations. You are having a candidate who is rewarded for engaging with more voters and earning their support. One thing we've seen in, say, mayoral elections, we've had a lot of mayors have been elected by ranked choice voting now, and they not only beat someone head to head like 54 to 46, that kind of majority definition, but they also get ranked second or third by a lot of the people that voted for the candidate who finished as second. So they actually end up getting ranked usually by more than 70% of the voters as a high first, second, or third choice, which just is a manifestation of kind of reaching out to people. So I'll maybe stop at those examples. There's more that can be said, but just that if we can have elections in November for Congress and president, for other offices, where we can have third parties and independents, and it's okay, and we can enrich the debate and offer some more choices. That's, I think, very important, and I think does some valuable things for kind of depolarizing some of this sort of head-to-head zero-sum politics we have. And if we can reward candidates really in any uses of ranked choice voting, but particularly those like big primary elections, for really trying to be as representative as possible. Maybe I'll just say one more. Ranked choice voting is essentially a tool that can be applied in different ways. And there are ways you can combine ranked choice voting with other changes. You talked about sort of, or in your question, like, is it important sort of in itself? It does more with other things, right? And those choices are sort of up to the policymakers, but you can add it into a solution to direct election of the president or not. But if you do, it's a good part of reform of the Electoral College. It goes very well with some changes that create more of a level playing field, or at least greater access for candidates through some kind of money in politics changes. That means more candidates are viable and get a chance. And when you have more candidates that are viable and get a chance, it's nice to have ranked choice voting. It's nice to do it in tandem with, say, good voter guides or good civic information for a voter, so they have a chance to learn about these new choices, right? And it's better when you do that. It's better just generally to do that, but they go well together. We would argue it's really sensible to do in tandem with considering having more than one representative for legislature. So in your Congress or state legislature, we are, in the same way we sort of have a single choice system, we have a single representative per area for all of Congress right now. And we didn't used to do that. We used to have more than one representative that you might have as a voter. And if you could do that and have ranked choice voting, they're a really powerful tool together. So one of the arguments we make for ranked choice voting is it's just a tool that will enhance the power of other reforms.
That makes sense. And as you say, it's been rolled out a lot on local levels. You said even a bunch of colleges, right?
Yeah.
So it can make choice in a lot of different. It can make a difference in a lot of different contexts. I guess if you've grown up in a system where the system is you have X number of candidates, usually two, but maybe three or four, and you just pick your favorite, that's maybe what naturally comes to your mind when you think of voting. Like that's what you should do. But I like that idea of it being a tool that can be used in synergy with other things or by itself.
Yep.
So I sent you a few counter arguments, and I'm hoping you can field some rebuttals or thoughts on them. I typically do enjoy interviews that are a little bit more oppositional in my gut, but unfortunately, I just love ranked choice voting. So like these are some kind of intellectual rebuttals, but I'm not sure how much I actually believe in them. But they're the best I could find, right? In the research I've done. So the biggest one, of course, the topic is not about ranked choice voting per se. It's very specifically whether it should be rolled out for federal elections across the entire United States, right? And that's a big change when you're talking about, the most powerful country to have ever existed in the world, right? It's military, its economy, a very, very small change in the way that things work in the US will have incredible implications for the world. And a small change in voting policy can have big implications for the US. I came across authors who, it might be kind of a spurious or like a non-argument, right? Like you're afraid of unknown change, right? Because like when you make some kind of voting reform change at the national level, it's going to ripple through society before it sort of all of its impacts manifest, right? It's not like this discrete thing that like, okay, like it's a different way to do things. Like this might affect everything. So what do you see as potential bad sides to such an extreme, overnight action of like rolling this thing out to the entire country, or do you not see that as a downside at all?
Well, it's interesting. It's both more consequential, right? If we got Congress to establish, which they can do, by the way, this is not a constitutional change. Congress could require it for all U.S. House races tomorrow. And all of our elections in 2024 for Congress, at least, could be with ranked choice voting. Also, any state can do it for its own elections for state office. Interestingly, Congress can't require it for presidential elections. That has to be done by the state. But let's just talk about Congress. I think actually the more voters that use it, the easier the voter education challenge, right? The more that it's the norm, the more we can center people in the new reality, which is, as we say, as easy as 1, 2, 3, right? Like from the voter perspective, it really is very straightforward. And we have learned good practices for ballot design, good practices for showing the results. And where we see those fall short is almost always when it's squeezed into a system where they're mostly not using ranked choice voting or something, right? And you have overworked, underpaid election officials like trying to do it, and they just don't do it as well as they can. But if we're all doing it, it actually will be that much more likely to be done well, and voters will understand what it is, because, they'll be talking on the political news programs and everyone will be saying, hey, well, we now are using ranked choice voting, right? And it's not picking and choosing which places are. So I actually feel that would make it easier. And I think, have a nice equitable effect across states. We don't have to have all states do everything the same, but I think it does create a dynamic where, let's say there is a new political force that tries to run in November, they can give it their best crack everywhere rather than say, oh, we're only doing it in these 4 states that have ranked choice voting. And, weirdly, we're not going to run in these other states, or we're going to be a spoiler without ranked choice voting over all those elections in this state. And here we won't be. It'll create some sort of normalcy to political developments like that. I think the part of ranked choice voting that I want to make sure we do as well as we can, and I think it's easier actually when more places are using it, or when it's more comprehensive, but is to understand the close results, right? So ranked choice voting, any elections could be close, and the active ranking we know is easy, and we know that voters can find it easy. We know ballot designs can be done. I'll just say, like New York City, which is a very diverse city, lots of different income levels, biggest city in America by multiple levels. And they went to ranked choice voting, used it for their primary elections, but really big consequential ones in 2021. And 99.7% of voters cast a valid ballot, and in the very first time out, about 90% chose to rank in at least one office. And they don't have to rank, by the way, but 9 out of 10 did, and they did so well, and or they knew how to do it and so on. But you can have close races and people afterwards are saying like, ooh, I hope I did the right thing, right? My candidate lost, and I want to make sure I was understanding the system, right? So it's not the active ranking. There is a certain work we need to do to make sure people understand without getting too lost in the weeds, but just sort of like, here's how it works, and here's how the results work. And I think that's one thing we've gotten a lot better at, for showing the results. The problem is we can't require the jurisdictions to use the good tools they have. So not all jurisdictions show the results in kind of an intuitive way. And I think that's something that we just need to keep working on. But if we get this great federal legislation after this debate persuades all of our members of Congress to go the right way, they can build into it, implementation standards that I think that are all on the table. They're all on the shelf. They're all ready to be used, and we can just bake it in to make sure we do the right thing.
Excellent. And I guess another part of this is also like, if changes in our federal elections are very consequential, therefore we shouldn't change them. I guess the converse is also true. We should make them better. If they're so consequential, we should probably be focusing on making them better.
Yeah. Oh, and can I just sort of one piece?
Please.
There are different ways we can change our election methods. A lot of ways, and in some ways they're intellectually really cool to learn about. And a lot of other countries use forms of proportional representation, like based on voting for parties. There's different alternative methods that there's a very vigorous debate about, like, oh, my kind of voting is better than your kind of voting. But the nice thing about ranked choice voting is it actually leans very much into norms we have, which is say your first choice does matter a lot, right? So that's all you have now. So your first choice not only matters a lot, but that's all, right? Like, that's the only thing that matters. Ranked choice voting is like, well, your first choice matters a lot, but you get a backup choice, your second choice, when your first choice just happens to be the very weakest candidate in the field and finishes last. And there's a certain intuition of like, okay, when you're last, you kind of lose. But it also means outcomes are not radically different than they are today, right? They're getting the most first choices is always the very best position to be in ranked choice voting. And in contested 3-person races with ranked choice voting, 3-candidate races, about almost 90% of the winners get the most first choices. That does mean like 1 out of 10 times they change, and that's important. And the incentives of behavior of the candidates change across all the other ones too, but I think they change in a way that is pretty clear or healthy. Like, it's good to talk to more voters, and like that's new, but it's kind of what we hope they're doing anyway, and they're just doing more of it. So I think we've now seen it enough in action that I think that can be reassuring too. So when I started, ranked choice voting wasn't used anywhere in the United States, and it's I think we didn't have all the tools to know how it would worked out. But I still wanted to pass it for everything at that time. But I think now I can say, you know what, we are really ready to do it. And so I think that can be reassuring to people. Say, okay, you're taking the biggest country in the world and you're really changing the out. You're just, I think you are making it better, but you're not turning over everything we know about who wins and loses, right? It's just it's punishing that 1 out of 10 candidates or winners who for whatever reason have more trouble winning half the votes when they have more than one person running against them. And maybe they shouldn't win, but they certainly could. And the people who gets the most first choices often do win.
Yeah. So that particular situation where you have three candidates running is one part of what I think might be something I can think of as a legitimate rebuttal from Khan, which is I don't know if it's the edge cases, but it could just be the cases in which ranked choice voting may bias towards extremism versus our current system. So the one sort of thought experiment, if I'm sure you're familiar with it, it's new to me. You got 3 people in a race, one's right, one's left, maybe extreme, maybe not, one's moderate. People tend to like a right or a left leaning candidate. A lot of people are more biased towards one side or the other. And so if you have only 3 candidates, the moderate is going to be eliminated in the first round, and you're only going to have those 2 choices, right or left, maybe extreme, maybe not left. And so that's with 3. Obviously, if you have 4, that would change it up. But that's one example. The other comes from Mansfield. I don't remember his name, Harvey or Henry Mansfield Jr. He had an essay talking about the role of parties in filtering candidates, that the primary process does essentially function to present to the American public 2, in theory, good candidates, 2 good people to run our country. Whereas, if you have, 10 candidates running for president, that puts the responsibility on each voter to do research into each of 10 candidates. Now, when most people go into a voting booth, they don't really know, even the person they know they're going to vote for, they don't know the policies, right? And so this problem of voter education would be made far worse if we had more candidates, and having 2 main parties helps to filter down candidates to something more manageable. So those 2 things, the 3 people running example and the party example, are both seem like ways that ranked choice voting could select for more extreme candidates.
Well, let me start with the first one, which sort of the premise is the candidate who finishes last might be sort of the compromise choice, might be the non-extremist, but they still are last, right? And there's actually no election system used in any national governing body or presidential office in the whole world where that candidate would win, right? So A lot of countries use the system that, or some countries at least, not that
I
many.
guess I guess the idea in my mind is that in that kind of a system, each of the parties, whoever is representing those right and left candidates, are forced to moderate themselves to be more populist, right, to appeal to more voters.
Yeah, but I think, I mean, they also have to compete for the second choices of that centrist candidate, right? So let's say it's, some version of 40-40-20, right? 40-40-20. But to win, you've got to be the second choice of the candidate, of the backers of the candidate with 20, right? So if you're just being extreme, you aren't going to win, right? You have to build a majority, and you have to build a majority with the backers of those the backers of that candidate, right? Now, if that candidate, and this is where we're also trying to actually not revolutionize who wins and loses. Like, we're not trying to say we're going to change things so much that candidates who are in last place now might win, right? Like, it's like, no, sorry, you last place winners are not going to win. You've got to figure out a way to be some people's first choice, a lot of people's first choice. And that's what we're used to, and that's what we're still keeping a lot of. It's just, we're also saying you also have to get over half the votes, right? And you have to get up to half the votes against your strongest opponent. And that act of assembling a majority via your first choices and your backup choices really is pushing you to be as representative as possible. So we feel comfortable on that respect, and I think it is intuitive for voters, and we've seen outcomes that I think are reassuring. That point also, I was saying about how winners of most, say, mayoral races are not only getting that 55-45, but they are getting first, second, and third choices of really 65, 70, 75% of people. They don't necessarily have to win, but they tend to because of the incentives of the system. The other one about, will we just have a deficit of voter information? I think this is where sometimes people can confuse ranked choice voting in different applications of it. Like, so Alaska uses ranked choice voting differently than Maine, and they're both really interesting. So Maine keeps primary elections just like we always have had, or have had for the last 100 years. We have not always had primaries, but the last 100 years. And you got to win a primary, get to the general election, and they use ranked choice voting in the primary. And you can file as an independent, but the same powers that you have now. So the Maine elections in November have 3 or 4 candidates. I don't think there's been a key ranked choice voting contest for House or Senate yet that has had more than 4 people in November. And they had 7 Democrats ran for governor in 2018, and only the first place person only had like 32%. But then she ultimately won the ranked choice voting election, and then she ended up winning. But by the time she was in November, 6 of the Democrats were no longer running. So that's one way of doing it. The Alaska system is one where they no longer have separate primaries. Everyone runs on the same ballot together, the same way they do in some other, like California does this system too, where everyone just runs on the same ballot. California, you only get to vote for one. Alaska, you only get to vote for one. But in California, 2 people go to November, so they have a head-to-head runoff after that. So they have that sort of clarifying election. In Alaska, 4 people. So they have what's called a top 4 kind of form of ranked choice voting. So that first ballot in the primary electorate, yes, there's a lot of choices, but 4 people get to advance from that, and you get kind of a second look at them, and then they use ranked choice voting. And I think that kind of addresses his concerns, but it does mean that you can have more than one person of one party on the November ballot. You can have 2 or 3 or 4 Democrats and Republicans, but you do have the benefit of having seen how they ran the first time, and whatever you can learn about 4 people at most. And I think this is where there's a virtue in creating opportunities for voters to learn about candidates, and for candidates to have incentives to get out and reach out to people. And I think that either the Maine or Alaska one, I think, really kind of should be reassuring to this feeling like, oh my gosh, there's going to be so many candidates and we just can't learn about them. There is a way that some cities use ranked choice voting where they just have one election. That's all. So you don't get a second look at the candidates. I think that while that's something we might want to look at, I think all the expectations are that when we adopt this for Congress, it'll keep some kind of two-round system where there's like a winnowing process, either Alaska style or Maine style.
Hmm. It makes a lot of sense. Thank you for those answers. Again, I wish I had some really legitimately good guns to bring out here, but there's not a lot on the negative side. So my final question, it might seem a little bit absurd, but I think it's important for students who are, thinking deeply about this topic for a month plus. If a high school student out there watching wanted to get involved in the push for RCV now or in the future, how could they?
Well, I'm glad they're having this debate. You are getting involved just by having this discussion, because I think it is an issue that I have confidence in, that the more we get to talk about it, the more we have a chance for it to advance. And when we were sort of more on the margins and things, it was of course harder to make progress, but now we're having people talking about it. So I'm just so glad that this debate topic was chosen and won a majority of those participating, and that's a great start. I'd say that there are tools out there. So Fairvote is an advocacy group, but we are sort of an educational research group. We have Fairvote Action, which is our more trying to change things all the time organization, and it is has a lot of resources about getting involved. And one thing that's exciting is in most states there's some group out there, Better Ballot Iowa, or ranked choice voting Maryland, or there's groups in most states that are trying to bring it to their state. Something I'd actually would like to see more than I have seen is some coordination among students interested in bringing it to their high school campus elections and college. We are seeing that happen organically. I'd love to kind of figure out tools that we can do to make it just that much more of an easier choice for people to consider. Because I do think that the more we rethink and reimagine voting as ranking and say, oh, I'm doing a Twitter poll, I should rank, like the more we get to just show that side of our thinking, the more it is likely that that's how we'll just move to making these choices generally. So I think there's a lot of creativity or opportunities for people to bring something to us about like how do we inject it more into the culture and more into these choices that we make every day. And then if they want to be more sort of structurally and sort of organizationally involved, check out Fairvote Action and the Get Involved page, and there are ways to get involved with us, but what we often want to do in that page is direct people to others that they can connect with more locally in their states.
That is a beautiful answer. Something that didn't occur to me, but any debater out there right now could change their high school elections to ranked choice voting. Why not? You're a
Yeah.
debater. You can do it. Go do it. That's amazing.
Yeah. Yeah, that would be exciting for me.
Cool. That's all the questions I have. Thank you for your
Excellent.
time.
Yeah, thank you. Well, yeah.
I'm doubtless a lot of students will find this interesting. They always love these interviews, but also very useful in preparing for their debates. So,
Okay. Well, good.
yeah,
Well, good.
thanks.
Well, is there some way to measure what happens? I mean, so is the task where, of course, they're supposed to, like, you might really like ranked choice voting, but you are tasked with being against it, right? And you win by
Sure.
opposing it, right? But so
Correct.
you be able to sort of learn which side wins or something like that. But is there some like evaluation afterwards about what they've learned about the process, or any tool like that where we can sort of see what it's meant for people?
That's a great question. So in this style of debate, we do 7 topics every year. So they're mostly policy and sometimes international policy. We did one about Japanese law this year. But some of them are kind of more moral questions, right? So I think within any group, you could poll, before and after, but generally that doesn't happen. I've done it for classes before, for single classes, right? But that doesn't, it's, not really much of a gauge to be asking 40 kids versus, 40,000 kids.
Yeah, yeah.
So yeah, I mean, the winner is, yeah, obviously just whoever convinces a judge. It's very subjective in that way, right? But in terms of learning, I think, I found that inevitably, even if it is, as I think this topic is a bit biased, I think it inevitably makes students just think very deeply about it, because you do have to take both sides, and you do have to be,
Right.
even in middle school, be using, academic literature to support your points, and you'll lose if you don't. So anyone involved in this topic will be very educated about it
Yeah,
afterwards.
yeah.
Like they will be. There's no way around it.
Yeah, yeah, super cool. Well, I hope there's any way that if they do take you up on finding out about getting involved. But even yeah, just love to see how it all goes. So anyway, well, thanks for reaching out. Great to talk.
Hey, thank you. Thank you.
All right,
Have a beautiful day.
take
Bye
care.
bye.
You too. Bye bye.